Here lies Lord Timothy Dexter, 1748 to 1806. His obituary, published in the Newburyport Herald, reads,
Self-titled Lord Timothy Dexter, he lived perhaps one of the most eccentric men of his time. His singularities and peculiar notions were universally proverbial. Born and bred in low condition in life, and his intellectual endowments not being of the most exalted stamp, it is no wonder that a splendid fortune, which he acquired, though perhaps honestly, by dint and speculation and good fortune, should have rendered him in many aspects truly ridiculous. The qualities of his mind of that indefinite craft, which forms an exception to every other character recorded in history, and known in the preferent age, and none but himself could be his parallel.
Except many have paralleled him since. How often in the news today do you hear the story of an individual coming from humble beginnings before gaining immense wealth? The geographic location of Dexter's grave symbolically represents the beginning of a national economic shift, with the end result being an economic state that allowed Dexter, and many others since, to make a substantial wealth in just a lifetime. Timothy Dexter's grave lies in the Oak Hill Cemetery in Newburyport, Mass. Left of his grave is the Bartlett Mall, spelled Mall, and the Superior Courthouse. The Mall predates the 1762 split of Newbury that formed modern Newburyport. The Superior Courthouse, built in 1800, is one of the oldest active courthouses in the country today. The Mall and the courthouse are living and active artifacts in Newburyport that tie the city back to its colonial times. To the right of Dexter's grave sits a portion of U.S. Route 1. The highway, built in 1922, stretches 2,369 miles from Key West, Florida to Fort Kent, Maine. As Route 66 is a symbol for the western migration of people in the United States, Route 1 symbolically represents the growing success of the free market economy through the transport of industrial goods and personal travel along the Atlantic seaboard. Timothy Dexter's life lies between these two periods. Economically, he is totally in the modern free market economy, but socially, he tries in vain to cling on to the social hierarchy of the colonial period. These vain attempts led to folklore portraying Lord Timothy Dexter as an extraordinarily lucky man, but his successes in investments and trade were due to his high creativity, wit, and intelligence. To begin a study on Dexter, one must first look at his autobiography/memoir, A Pickle for the Knowing One. This small pamphlet helps cement his social image of the local idiot. Readers of the first edition complained of the total lack of punctuation and rampant grammatical errors. Dexter promptly put a page of punctuation in the back of the second edition of the book, telling the reader to pepper and salt them as they pleased. As ludicrous as the entire ordeal sounds, for understanding Dexter's early life, it is the only primary source material there is. Thus, though it may not be entirely accurate, it must be used heavily to tell this phase of Dexter's life. Dexter was born on January 22, 1747. He was raised in the town of Malden in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, to a family of poor farmers. At the age of 8, he went to work on a neighboring farm. He remained there for 6.5 years. As Dexter approached manhood, he ventured out into Charlestown, where he spent 11 months as an apprentice to a successful leather maker. Shortly after, he moved north to Newburyport, where he would spend the vast majority of the remainder of his life. Very little is known about the next 8 years of his life. He did work his way up to becoming a very successful leather tanner in the city. This leads up to Dexter's first jump in social class, from lower to middle. As put in the collection of essays titled The Origins of American Capitalism, there were marked social divisions in colonial times, but they were not fixed, and allowed for individuals to move up the ladder or down. This can be seen clearly in Dexter's marriage to the relatively affluent widow Elizabeth Frothingham in 1770. Dexter was aware this move pulled him out of his lowly caste, and it can be reasonably inferred that Dexter's motivation to marry this widow was purely economical. This inference can be made by Dexter's immediate mistreatment of his wife. As Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Marquardt points out in his biography on Dexter, something was wrong with their married life. There was simply an underlying friction and malice that burgeoned at a later time. This unfortunate climax came later in the relationship when, after Dexter asked Elizabeth to leave him for good, and she refused, he cut her off completely, calling her a ghost. For the next 20 years, Dexter lives his middle-class life with his wife and 6 children, 4 of which were from Elizabeth's previous marriage. During this time, Dexter continued to work as a leathersmith, while also making small investments, mostly in property in New Hampshire, on the side. During the Revolution, he also began to accept the highly depreciated continental currency as a form of payment for his leather work. Dexter had accumulated thousands of the bills. Once the United States was officially formed in 1789, Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, instituted a policy which redeemed the continental currency at face value. Dexter was an overnight millionaire. Some claim this to be complete lie, except evidence exists that proves he made other investments based on the continued success of the United States. This investment was one of many on this belief.
Was a bond that so Dexter loaned the U.S. government $5,000. Essentially, it's $5,160 or something, and in today's money, that's like $5 million. So he was actually able to loan the government $5 million of his own money. He would get 6% interest 10 years later. That was the deal, because they needed the money up front, and he was one of the few people that had enough to loan to the government.
Skeptics could still insist that Dexter's investments driven on the success of the United States were biased by either nationalistic and/or patriotic views. One key piece of evidence dismisses this. Once Dexter had amassed his fortune, he purchased a mansion with 5 acres of land on High Street in Newburyport. In an effort to show off his enormous wealth, he had 40 larger-than-life statues depicting various people built and placed in front of his home. Today, the statue of William Pitt, along with the arms of 2 others, still exist. Now, how does this all relate to Timothy Dexter not being a patriot? One of the statues in the estate depicted King George III. In this time in America, after just completing fighting a war against this King of England, and not long before another one began, having a larger-than-life statue of this man in one's front lawn was a sure sign of not being a patriot. With his newfound wealth in hand, he tried to use it to move himself socially to the elite level, not just fiscally. The statues were just a part of it. His house was outfitted with beautiful woodwork, especially on the cupola, which provided an amazing view of Newburyport and the mouth of the Merrimack River. The house was also outfitted with a 3rd floor exclusively for parties, a library, though it was said he never read for more than 10 minutes at a time, and an elegant dining room. But even with all of his riches, he did not settle, and took up the trade of other wealthy elite in Newburyport: trade and exchange. And Dexter brought his unique wit and creativity in a way only Dexter knew how.
Dexter thought that in the West Indies, he began to realize that they had a problem when they were boiling their concoction, skimming off the residue that went to the top. And his view was that you take these large, shallow pans with long handles and just kind of get at the top of the boiling brew to skim off the undesirable components, and made a fortune doing that.
He was able to sell coal to Newcastle, England, for example, because, again, sort of an odd thing. Newcastle mines coal. Sent a shipload of coal over there. He just happened to show up during a miners' strike, so the one thing they actually needed was coal. So, I mean, did some crazy things, but they paid off.
These examples are just a few of the outlandish business ideas that Timothy Dexter executed with the finances of his newfound wealth. The creative intuition that drove Dexter to make his initial investment in the continental currency persisted into this period of exchange. As the United States became the first independent democracy, it could not rely solely on the economic systems of imperialism, mercantilism, and the various other economic systems of the time. The free market economy that formed relied on the entrepreneurial creativity found in Dexter and continues to today. Dexter's high wit, intelligence, and creativity are seen in multiple aspects of his life, whether it was his marriage, investments, or savvy trade and exchange ideas. This magnified view of Dexter is valuable, but its overarching historical role is even more important. When one pushes all the lunacies surrounding Dexter's life aside, Dexter as a transitional figure bridging 2 social and economic periods is why his legacy is so valued, even 210 years after his death.